name is John Sheffield. I'm a Brit by background, though I've worked overseas for 12, 14 years now. I had the pleasure of 5 years living in Thailand, a little bit of time in Cape Town, South Africa, time here in the Philippines for a few years, 2 tours of duty in California, and then to get me back for all of my hot days, I was then sent to Norway for 2 years, which is minus 25 and snow on 10 months of the year. So I've had good experience around the world. I'm a business transformation guy. My background has been largely oil and gas, working with Caltex, Texaco, Chevron, and more recently Statoil, Exxon, a little bit with a media company, WPP. All of those areas I've been in project work and been focused on transformation. And I've had the pleasure of now working both in a product company in the oil space, as well as now consulting for the last 5 years, where it's all about people. And really the consulting people side is a big change from oil, where despite what you do with the oil wells, the oil still keeps pumping. Whereas in a people business, you have to focus on leadership and how you progress. The personal factors around John, I would say, that have enabled me to be successful in my career. One is I've tried to use a leadership style that is really caring and involving, and I try to connect with people at all levels in an organization to let people know that they can communicate freely, openly, and honestly. Like one other speaker who said this morning they were impatient, I'm definitely right up there on the impatience front, and as soon as we're 5 minutes over schedule, my foot's tapping and I'm thinking it's time to move on. But that impatience, if you can harness it, turns it into progress and the challenge to move forwards and change the way that you do business. I tend to be constantly in motion. I tend to start more things than I can finish. And it's a known attribute for me that I need to work with individuals who can complete some of the tasks. And Romy Ramos at the back there was a very great friend back for a couple of years as we worked through a change program. I'd be the one creating all the mess and he'd be the one coming along and clearing it up. So thanks, Romy, for that time. I do like to motivate people towards a compelling vision. I believe it's important to set targets high, and you've heard that also mentioned by other speakers today. I also think it's a quality to be trained through your career to be unemotional in how you make decisions. Now, that comes across, I heard that's not going to be a great thing here in the Philippines because you're number one at being emotional. But I think for business, it's good if you can sit and look at the pros and cons and really make trade-offs between decisions and make the best decision for the organization, not just the best decision because I think it's a great idea or it's my pet hobby horse. So that's a little bit about John. And what I'll now do is just move on to a little bit about, next slide please, a little bit about my firm that I work for. It's called Pcubed. No one in Asia can pronounce the name well, so Pcubed. It started as program planning professionals, which was too hard, so we said P to the power of 3, Pcubed, and you end up with the name. Still means nothing, so maybe we'll change it next year. The work that we do on this slide here, and I'll only be very brief on here, across the top you'll see some industries that we work with, many represented here, like financial services, telco, high-tech, manufacturing, energy, oil and gas, and utilities, and into then public sector. On the left, you'll see a list of areas that we focus on as a business, and we try to avoid talking about project management or program management, and you'll see that the terms are really focused around the work we do on strategy execution, like the program Marvin's talking around, modernizing his business, bringing it forwards into the next decade. We focus on cost and complexity reduction, which might be to look at how do you take cost out of a business. And for the motor manufacturers or the other manufacturers here, that's an ongoing exercise around lean and around improving business. We also work with companies around how to innovate and get products to market more quickly. Pharma is one area that's important. Also then how to manage portfolios of work, and then lastly, the M&A, mergers and acquisitions, how to deliver those and deliver them successfully, and couple with that business change enabled by IT. And Darren, that would be into your space of implementing an SAP system, changing the business to operate processes in a different way. So those are our 5 themes. Those are the things that we do. And the lessons learned that I want to talk about today come from doing those 5 things across those industries for some of these clients that you see here. And one in particular that I'll point to over on the left-hand side, you'll see that sort of UK, Great Britain flag there, which we may have to change next week, by the way. If Scotland vote to leave the UK on Thursday, then the red will come out of that flag and it'll just be blue and yellow. So hopefully that won't happen, but we'll see on that next week. But that was the London 2012 Olympics symbol, and Pcubed had the pleasure of having about 50 people involved in running the overall program work streams for the London Olympics, and I'll refer to that as I talk about the lessons learned. Other customers on there, you can see there's a variety. Airbus is huge for us. We have about 350 people working with Airbus on R&D projects, building new wings or figuring out how to control all aspects of the aircraft manufacturer. In Asia, we work with JP Morgan in Hong Kong. We work with Petron, a little bit with San Miguel, SMPT Rubber, as well as WPP, Diebold, and Concord Energy as a few names just to kind of ground us here in Asia. So, what does that lead up to? Business transformation. How many people here have been involved in some kind of change in their organization? Could you put a hand up? This is just to test whether you're awake or not. Have you been involved in any change in your organization, or has it all been static? And if anyone doesn't raise their hand, say that there's been no change, I will pick on you. Okay, so change is something that occurs across organizations on a constant basis. It's something that is often created from the top, or sometimes created from the middle levels. If you can move on to the next slide, please. Pcubed believes that there's 9 key lessons that you can put in mind for dealing with change in your organization, and some of this relates to leadership, and definitely leaders need to be involved in driving that change. Some of the knowledge comes from doing over $40 billion worth of change projects, so it's not just one program that's created these, it's a whole number. I thought it was interesting, the first speaker this morning talked about the need to transform and personal transformation and how it was important to look at transforming Deutsche Bank Knowledge Services. Martin, we heard talking about transforming his firm, and so this session is really about how to transform. Next slide, please, Anne. Number 1 lesson learned, clarity on scope. You see it almost across the board that scope becomes confused when you're driving change within an organization, whether it be large or small. We recommend that you think quite carefully earlier on around what is my scope? What am I trying to do? And if you took the case of the London Olympics, which is a very large $9 billion construction build with many different stakeholders, you can take a view of saying, well, I will keep my scope fixed, or I will make my scope flexible, in which case time needs to adjust, and you really have the choice of sitting down and focusing on, really, am I time driven, or am I cost driven, or am I results driven? And you need to make a conscious choice. And when you look at this chart, it just tries to say that change may occur at the bottom with lower benefits in a local part of the business. It might be the AP function fixing its way of paying bills. It could be into cross departments where we try and figure out how to get the sales force working with the accounts payable department, working with the other parts of the organization to recover the money. Or it could be now a whole business unit, or it could be across the company, or it could be revolutionary and beginning to connect a whole new business model across companies. And if you take a process to assess where you're at, it helps you drive the change because you can build the change around the scope. The other point on this talks about vision-led rather than emergent. It's a term we use because often we see change in businesses emerge in multiple places, and you get a big program doing the ERP replacement, and you get a big program doing the billing system replacement. You get another big program retraining the sales force. And that's come from specific needs in the area, and it's very good to pull that together into a single vision and make it a successful program. Next slide, please, Anne. Number 2, be clear on what success looks like at key stages. Going back to the London Olympics again, the way that was driven on a 7-year program was to break down at the beginning of each year and say, in this year, we will finish the stadium. In this year, we will finish the roads into the park. And clear targets were agreed, set up front with the organization, and then communicated across the entire workforce so that everybody knew in this year, our targets were X, our targets were Y. In the case of this chart, it was just trying to show on a merger or an acquisition, you've got a due diligence phase that you need to complete. You have a post-due diligence valuation phase. You need to set up a 100-day program to work the first part of the business, the 300-day program. And by setting clear goals within those windows, you let the entire organization come forwards with you and drive the change. Next slide, please, Anne. The third key message for you today, I think I've heard it a couple of times already today around bringing people forwards. It's all around ownership, thinking like an owner. That's in part thinking like, I think it's back to the analogy we heard earlier. It's about commitment. It's about getting everybody involved and thinking as though they are part of the business. And taking a conscious choice to say, let's make people own the change, is extremely powerful within an organization. You see a symbol here, bottom right, for you telco fans. You may know one of your UK competitors. There was recently a merger between T-Mobile, Deutsche Telekom, and Orange, which formed a company called EE. And EE was created at a time when the spectrums were moving from 3G to 4G. And like everywhere, there's a regulator and there's an auction process. And it was going to be a year and a half out in the UK before before the regulator approved the license operators to move to 4G. There was a guy sitting in one of the masts who was a mast engineer. I don't know the detail of what they do when they're fiddling with masts, but he was retuning, recalibrating. And he speculated to one of his colleagues, who was the supervisor visiting, to say, do you know, if we refarmed this equipment and did this, and did this, I could move this mast from 3G to 4G within a week. That started a process that went up through the organization and eventually got to the CEO to say, wow, we could actually steal a march on the competition by refarming our existing equipment, get it working as 4G, get to market before the competition. The CEO then decided to launch a program of about 100 million to do the merger, to bring in both companies, to centralize the supply chain distribution for the two companies. We went round, I don't know how many it was, 450 shops in the UK, told everybody they had the weekend off, took down the Orange logos that were all over the shops, or the T-Mobile logos, put the Everything Everywhere logo back on the wall, put the old image back on over the top, so that on D-Day we could ring up all of the stores and say, peel down the old logo, and there would be the new image. So the company overall bet 120 million pounds, so what's that, 200 million, 180 million US dollars, on getting this refarmed equipment ready for a date. And they got approval from the regulator 1 week before the advertising campaign started. The funds were committed, and they were able to basically steal a march of 7 months on the competition. And they got 1 million users before anyone else turned 4G on. So there's a great kind of case of an organization really working together to feel and think like an owner. Next slide, please. Clarity on roles and governance. I also call this political mesh-up. The words there are the kind of nice, kind ones. Be clear on what the governance is of your project or your program. But I think it's stronger than that. Be clear on what is the governance and make sure you have enough senior sponsorship so that when you face individuals who are trying to protect their area of the business, or they're trying to look after their agenda because they think it's nice to move forwards in a particular area, that you can get to the clear decision. So take it as be clear on roles and governance. Read the box on the bottom which says stop the personal agendas from getting in the way and focus on the key items that you really want to crystallize on. Next slide, please. We heard it this morning, get the right team. When that's the part of the Olympics project management office team there for London 2012, when David Higgins, the chairman, was putting together his organization. And you have to remember on the Olympics, there was a big party in Paris, and the decisions made, go, you've won. You then have to go from, we heard it this morning, I'd rather have 10 great people than 50 mediocre. This points to the same element. If you're driving change, please pick the 10 key really good people to drive your change, and they'll help motivate others along towards the goal. Also, as you develop in the Philippines and as you grow, the need to expand and bring in knowledge, I would say on this one, keep in mind the need to work with partners and to develop partnerships and to make sure that you leverage the skills that the partners have. Make sure you build in knowledge transfer so that when you are looking at using outside partners, the knowledge that they've got gets incorporated into what you're doing and you can bring that back for the future. Next slide, please, Anne. All the CFOs in the room, no surprise on control the money. Something we found to be quite useful is when you're having a conversation around money and someone says, well, gee, it's only another 50,000 to do this little piece of work. Then the question is, that's fine, who's going to provide that from their budget? And push a culture that says we won't increase scope unless someone increases the amount of money that we have in the budget. And it drives a behavior within your organization that says it's not okay just to add extra free items along the way and cause the scope to get larger and larger. In the case of the Olympics, we were able to use the UK Treasury as the big stick to help control the costs. In your organizations, I'd suggest it's your finance organization that you use to kind of act as the driver of maintaining control of the budget. Next slide, please, Anne. Rigorous execution, that's the Olympic Park in London as it ended up just before the Olympics. It took 7 years to build, and I think it was around 9 billion pounds to construct. So it was no small amount of work. One of the lessons learned when we asked Sir David Higgins and his crew what was the lesson learned from this, and one interesting point which you wouldn't necessarily expect was initially no one made any plans for how they would get 10,000 workers into this park every day, and it was just left to assume that they'd all turn up in their Toyotas and their Hondas and their SUVs, and of course there was no parking, and they were parking 3 miles away and trying to get a taxi, and then the workforce started to turn up late. So one of the interesting points was rigorous execution means think about the off-the-wall items, like how your people get to work, not just the actual how do you do the build. The other one that came out was, in this case, rigorous execution meant the park was finished 9 months earlier than was expected. And because it was ahead of schedule, no one had done too much advanced thinking about who would run it in the 9 months before it went live. So there was a little bit of extra work to figure out, well, now it's here, it's up and running, there's streets, there's roads, there's rubbish bins, there's infrastructure that needs managing, and there was lots of work to put in place, the recovery there. So do try and drive to rigorous execution. If scope increases, budget needs to increase. If you have the need for, if people are asking for new bits of work, then get challenge around that. And this was a stakeholder nightmare. If you imagine lots of local authorities central government, there's a sports body for every type of sport, there's the public involved, and so you've got to drive, in this kind of case, a rigorous process to challenge any new scope that comes in. Next slide. Number 8, stakeholder management. I heard this morning the comments around a firm that's a family firm and we need to bring everybody forwards. Then in part you're going to need an increased awareness, if that's the case, of how to bring everybody forwards. In some businesses, up and out does exist, so if people don't like it, if they don't like what's happening, then there's the opportunity to move them on to other careers. But I'd suggest to you that if you are a family business, think about, you'll see the solutions to some of the problems on the right. Assess where you are with change, figure out what makes people tick in your organization, what they're worried about, and it'll be different. You know, if I did a stakeholder assessment of this room, I would guarantee what's worrying people would be different by different table. So figure out what people need to feel and hear about the program that you're doing. Work out how to coach the key leaders to work with the individuals, and then figure out the specific steps of communications or forums, town halls, where you bring people together to work together. And it is, you know, it's a discipline. Stakeholder management, change management is a discipline that we think we all know, but it's sometimes difficult. I was in Thailand a couple of days ago, and an old colleague from 2003, he said to me, in Thailand, people are very polite. He bowed to me and he said, "Kun John," Kun means Mr. He said, "Kun John, I don't know, when I first knew you, you were young and thin. And now, Kun John, you're old and fat." And in the Western way, I thought, oh my goodness, what's he trying to tell me? I'm old and fat, thank you very much. And I turned away and I thought, that's my day finished. And of course, what he was trying to say in Thailand was, now that you have earned enough money and you're rich enough to feed yourself, you're able to put on a few pounds, and now you've got grey hair, you must be wise. So he was telling me I was wise and rich, and I should be proud of myself, and I went away feeling despair. So really, in this whole area, tailor your message to your audience, figure out what makes them tick, figure out how to get them to enjoy the change journey. Next slide, please. Lastly, think about risk. You have to manage risk early, and risk is all the things that could go wrong in your program. You see a chart here that shows a black line, an unbroken line at the top, and then a dotted line below. The dotted line represents where you will end up if you don't manage risk or if your risks materialize. The top line is kind of aspiration of where people would like to be. In project management terms, we can tell you absolutely that the aspiration is always higher than the achievement. And so think about risk, and if you look at the point where the circle is, it says the risk that you should manage is often right at the beginning of what you're doing, and how you set the trajectory for success determines whether you are hitting this line, or this line. So think early and manage risk. It's not something any of us want to think about. Jovi would tell you that he's had to manage a number of risks that materialized in his family life as he moved forwards in his career. So be thinking about it early. So that's the 9 key lessons learned from Pcubed around business transformation. Next slide, please. And I just thought then I'd give you a couple of thoughts of things that are going around in my head. But please note, as it says here, there's a slight corruption of the American stock exchange mantra. All forward-looking statements are not really worth the paper they're written on, so take it with a pinch of salt. Just take it as John's thoughts rather than anything in particular. Next slide, please. Who cares about data? Anyone care about data in the room? A couple of hands. If you ask most CEOs, they'll think, oh man, someone else needs to fix that. If you talk to CFOs, they get it a bit more because data drives the accounts, drives the reporting, drives the statutory numbers. When you talk to sales guys, they definitely don't get data other than the one that says that they've got higher commission than anyone else. We are seeing a trend in companies to set data as an asset and to say data is important, and as you move to digital, a more digital environment, it's going to become more and more important. That doesn't mean you will launch out and start protecting every single little bit of data in your organization, but if you are an oil company, the top 10 types of data that you have are probably to do with exploration and reserves. Think about that data, appoint an owner, think about how you will clean it up on a regular basis and actually treat it as an asset that you can manage and leverage to grow your business. If you're in the supply chain world, it's going to be to do with your product sales and your product information. If you're in the pharmaceutical business, it's going to be the same kind of product information that drives your area. So think about data, appoint owners for the key elements, run regular cleanup, regular improvements, and then think about how can I leverage that data across my organization to make more money. The next slide, please. Something else we're seeing as a move is to do with asset management. We manage assets in the telco world through from handsets up through the mast equipment, through the assets of the billing systems and so on. In manufacturing, the assets will be the manufacturing line that runs the production of the vehicle. In utilities, it's running power plants, and this slide actually is from a power plant example. In oil and gas, it's all around oil fields and pumps that are going up and down to get oil out of the ground. In pharma, it's going to be the production line for producing the pharmaceutical item. We believe that there's going to be a trend of moving from reactive asset management, where people are looking at repairing items that they need for their business on a regular frequency, to one where software and data is able to look at the performance that's going on, the electricity consumption that's going on, the age of the equipment, the manufacturer's recommendation for when that equipment should be replaced, and will enable you to replace equipment before it goes wrong. And if you can do that, it's A, helping your CapEx and your OpEx because it's targeting your spend where it really needs to be, and B, you're avoiding downtime of your asset, which whatever business you're in, if you can avoid downtime, then it certainly helps your profitability. And on an oil field, if you keep an oil field running and avoid waiting until the asset goes down, that can be tens of millions a year, if not hundreds of millions a year in savings. It's not just about technology, it's about changing your business model, so you have integrated control rooms, you have the ability to look at how you connect across the organization to react quickly. Next slide, please. The third point I'll give you, which we're seeing banking clients beginning to talk to, and that's as they face regulation. This picture here shows the continents of the world, and you can see the different, in initials, the different regulations that are being pushed onto the banking world right now, and the chevrons are trying to show when those demands are placed. So the US is 2013, 2014 is when the regulatory push has been taking place. It's kicking off in a big way in Europe right now, and you should expect more pressure in the Asia market around 2015. In order to satisfy banking regulation requirements in terms of reporting, we're seeing the need for clients to be able to reach into their SAP system and get 10 bits of data, to reach into their front trading system and get 10 bits of data, reach into their retail organizations and get information, and then bring that together into a report that shows the regulator that they're behaving. So expect a push towards unstructured data in the banking world. Next slide, please. My last thought really ties around the world of the Philippines in a lot of ways, around the work that you do here for service centers. And this slide was just trying to pick together the generations of the service centers, and it comes from a source from ProServe Partner down the bottom. And it really says that the generations of the activity, the first stage was, I'll take your mess and do it for less, which was quite a good summary. It may not be offshore. Second would be moving to lower cost locations like the Philippines, global delivery model, maybe deploying SAP maybe deploying Oracle, Microsoft to come in and take on some of that work. The third area, which I know in the Chevron Center, I was talking with Key, the head of that organization recently. He said we're definitely getting more focused on lean and trying to figure out how to improve the processes for our clients. The trouble is the clients don't always like the message. So he's trying to figure out from Manila how to convince someone in Houston that they ought to change their business process because they could cut out some cost. And to really help the next stage is to move to generation 4, which is focused on innovation, where your staff begin to understand the domain much more, understand the domain knowledge, understand the data, understand the technology, and begin to be able to make suggestions and improvements with a cost benefit that allows clients to buy in. So that's my 4 thoughts for today. So final slide. I'd like to say thanks to Richard for inviting us to come along. I hope that was a little drive-by on some of the world that we see from the Pcubed perspective, and I look forward to catching up with you over lunch. Thanks very much.